Failure and success are not opposites. Business cultures that are open to failure, most people do better in cultures like that. When people get afraid of trying things because they're afraid to fail or they're afraid to be wrong, you need to get out of your comfort zone. That's how you grow.
My research showed that during your formative years, it's the people that you trust the most who can really imprint their limiting beliefs on you.
People forget when they get angry at their parents is they were doing the best they could with what they had.
There's a saying that success will teach you what works, but failure teaches you why. Welcome to Done Pretending, the podcast where healing meets authentic living. I am your host, Susan Houston, storyteller, mentor, and believer in the power of truth to set us free. This is your sanctuary for the soul, a safe space where we peel back the layers of judgment and fear to uncover the beauty of living real. Each week, you'll hear stories of courage, resilience, and transformation that remind you it's never too late to become who you were created to be. Hi, everybody. Hi, friends. Welcome back to our next episode of Done Pretending. So I'm so excited to welcome back Jan Raeder. Jan was on last week, and if you have listened to the podcast, you're going to understand why I brought her back. When we turned off the recording, our conversation continued, and it was so valuable. I said, you've got to come back, and we have to talk about this. So I'm so glad that you came back today.
Oh, yeah, me too. I was excited at the end of our conversation yesterday when you're like, would you come back? And I'm like, yeah, we need to talk about this stuff. We really do.
We do. And in case you haven't watched the last episode, first of all, go back and watch it. It's pure gold. But this is Jan Raeder. She has been in the martial arts. She has such wisdom about self-care. She calls herself the self-care sensei. She's an author. She's a speaker. Oh my gosh. But today, what we're going to talk about is failure and how we view failure in our lives, because all of us, let's be real, we hate to fail, right? We
Yep.
think that it's wrong. We think that, oh my gosh, we're never going to recover from this. But that's not always true, is it, Jan?
No, it's not. And what I think is interesting is after our conversation, and we left it, I just did a little mini dive into the research. I'm going to do more actually because I'm really fascinated by it. Is failure and success are not opposites, and failure in and of itself is not, the research shows the failure is not necessarily good or bad. Sometimes people don't succeed from failure. They actually do better when they succeed, when they have successes. But what it boils down to, it's all in how we view the failure. It's what do we do
Mhm.
after we fail? And it brings up such emotion. Like you said, we can be wrong. We are embarrassed. We have self doubt. There's so many things. And it ties back into what we talked about last time about who you are, finding out who you are. Kind of what you're doing here with this wonderful podcast is getting people to dig into who are you, and you're not pretending to be somebody else anymore. So that's
Right.
what I thought was so interesting is that how do you pause, reflect, and move forward from the failure? And we can get into more of that too, because that also applies when you're talking about business cultures too. Like
Absolutely.
business cultures that are open to failure and that they don't blame when that happens,
Hmm.
innovation can go on. And most people do better in cultures like that. So, but it's hard. I get it. It's really hard.
Well, and it's been proven that businesses who allow failure, who allow pure creativity, and that's when the genius happens. If people are afraid of always being told that you're wrong or coming up with ideas that are way off in left field and, they avoid speaking up, they stop that.
Yep.
But if they're allowed to put a wild idea out there and everyone goes, oh, and it's not right, it's not wrong. You
Right.
just have to view it as an idea. Is
Right.
it going to fit in this scenario? Maybe not.
Right.
but that doesn't mean that they failed for coming up with it.
Right, right. That's another thing that when I was doing my researching is failure is data. When I read that, I thought to myself, when I talked to a lot of different people about weight loss in particular, because I'm a
Mhm.
person, I don't know about you, but and I think most folks, not so much men, but more women, we hate getting on the scale
Oh,
because we
yeah.
think it defines who we are. And I have
Mhm.
mixed things, and I'm going to go into that just a little bit about the scale because it's something that everybody can relate to. I highly recommend you get on the scale. And I had done research many years ago about when to weigh yourself. And one study that I found was a European study. They recommended that you weigh yourself on Wednesdays because, and if you think about it, it's a really good day to do it. If people indulge over the weekend, by Wednesday, maybe you've lost a little bit of the overindulgence, the salt, things that maybe might give you a little bit more water. And, if you do it
Yeah.
on Friday, you've got the whole week, whatever. So, what I do myself is every Wednesday I weigh myself. But what I do now is right before I step on the scale, because I have so much anxiety about it and I have so much negativity about it because I let it for years define who I was, that number is I say every
Mhm.
time over and over like a mantra, it's just data. It's just data. It's just data. So all it is, it's helping me
And
stay.
that's and I want you to continue this. It brought up a memory of mine how it does give me a lot of anxiety. I
Yeah.
had someone at one time tell me they're going to draw a line in the sand unless I lose weight.
Yeah.
Oh, what does that even mean?
Yeah. What
You
does that
know?
mean?
It's
Yeah.
like
Right. Right. What
and
does
it
that mean?
did just the opposite of their intention, right?
Right. Right.
Because it gave me so much anxiety, it made me mad and
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was not very productive for that person to say that to you. But that's what I said. So when I read that about failure being data, I thought, well, that ties back to that thing that I do now with the scale. Is every time I
Mhm.
get on it, I say it's just data because it doesn't define who I am. And I used to tell my students, I taught kickboxing too, for amongst all the other things. And so I heard a lot of because it was a really big thing in the late 90s and 2000s. People were kickboxing, women were kickboxing. I think they still do it now. But anyway, I had a lot of women, and I had one woman in particular that came. She wanted to lose weight, so on and so forth. But we had a conversation, and she was really focused on her weight and the size of her clothes. And my first thing was, you don't wear your clothes inside out. So nobody sees the number of your clothes. If you're, whatever, pick the size you want it,
Yeah.
but you're not wearing your clothes inside out. So, and at all women, we all know this. If you go from store to store or online store, the number can be the same, but the fit is totally different and it's not your clothes.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I thought about. I was like, okay, failure. Cause a lot of people think if I get on that scale and I gain 3 pounds, 10 pounds, 4 pounds, whatever the number, I failed. And it's data.
Mhm.
Okay. So what did you do? How is it that, and then if you take that 30,000-foot view, which I highly recommend to people all the time. We talked about it a little bit on the last episode about not taking things so personally. What's the 30,000-foot view? How can I remove myself, if you will, and look at this from a
Mhm.
distance? And so that's what I think about when I started to look at these things with failure. I thought, that's what we need to do. We're gathering data. It is not an indictment against who we are if we make a mistake or if we don't do that thing right, quote unquote, whatever right is. So, what does it become? But it's what you do with the information afterwards. So, you fail at
Yep.
work and then somebody that gives you feedback. Okay, you can either be the victim with the feedback or you can own it and say, okay, do I trust this person? Do I believe that their feedback is good? Because some people, they may have an agenda when they're saying, so you have to get it from a trusted source, if you will. Again, not trying to say anything negative against people because you just, every situation is different. So if you then go, okay, then what can I do differently the next time? that's when you start to move forward, because then you learn, and then failure becomes a good thing where you start looking at it as, okay, I'm not afraid of it. I'm going to try something again, because that's another thing. When people get afraid of trying things because they're afraid to fail, or they're afraid to be wrong, or they're afraid to be embarrassed, or they don't want to take a
Mhm.
risk. And that's the thing that, I talk about in my book about comfort zone. You need to get out of your comfort zone. That's how you grow.
Yeah.
It's like a plant. You can't keep a plant like in the form of a seed. It doesn't. You have to let it burst out of the seed for it to go, to make whatever it is. I go back to, I used to, when I was younger, I used to have a necklace that had a mustard seed in it. Because if you know any of the scripture about the mustard seed, that plant is so
Yeah.
huge that comes from that tiny seed, and that is related to
Yeah.
people's faith. But the other thing too is I read a lot about bamboo. Bamboo takes 5 years before it bursts out of the ground, but a lot of that growth is still happening underground. So these are all things that tie into, how do we think about failure? Another thing I used to tell my students because I used to make them get up and do things in front of each other from ages 4 to 84 in the class. It didn't matter